Joseph, part 2, the Dreamer Enslaved. Who was all here last week? Okay. All right. Well, in part 1 of our series on the life of Joseph, we talked about the dysfunctional history of the patriarchs who came before him in the bloodline, which are the people who's responsible for shaping the direction of the family. And despite their mistakes, so often trying to hurry things along outside of God's will and taking matters into their own hands, God still had his hands on the final outcome because God's will is never denied. That reminds me, a few years ago, I think not long after I got here, I did a message, and we'll probably revisit that topic sometime soon, about divine sovereignty versus free will, and established that these things can and do work in harmony. Once God determines how things will be purposed, we have free will to choose the path there, but the path there ultimately leads to the place of God's choosing. So it's an interesting topic to talk about. Now, this truth remains untouched in Joseph's family, and of his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All three of them were told by God what was coming down the pike, what was going to happen in their lives, what it would bring. And all three of them managed to mess everything up and try it their own way. They took moral and ethical detours, but still everything worked out just the way God said it would. Everything came to fruition the way God said it would, despite their mistakes. And we can't alter God's will despite our efforts. All we can do sometimes is make the road harder on ourselves, which is what people do. We make it harder on ourselves than it needs to be. And there's an interesting point to note regarding faith and obedience when we look at Joseph and Joseph's character alongside the character of all his father figures, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his bloodline. Because what's interesting about Joseph, and this says a lot about faith, he's the only one who never heard from God. He never heard directly from God. But his great-grandfather did, his grandfather did, and his father did, but he never did. So everything he did, every decision he made, was based solely on his faith and his trust in God. And he always did the right thing by putting that first. He didn't hear from God like they did. While the Bible tells us that the other three did, he didn't have that benefit. So that shows us that faith alone in God's word is sufficient. That's enough. It's pretty ironic that Joseph, being the only one that didn't hear from him, was the most diligent in following God's will and holding his commandments sacred. So today we're going to move deeper into his life, and I would challenge you to see the truth that Joseph's life says more about God and how he operates than the lives of his forefathers. I mean, the reason we look at Joseph's life is because it is his trust and his faith that shows how God does things when we believe in him. And the other ones made their lives harder on themselves because they knew he told them his will, and they still tried to do it their own way. It's almost like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, generationally speaking, were conducting this symphony, this grand, beautiful piece of music, and when they were done, all their contributions had this musical masterpiece that is the life of Joseph, because the way they should have been is the way he is. And throughout all the turmoil and the pain we talked about last week, the Bible records no sin on Joseph's part. He never cursed God. He never slandered his brothers for throwing him into slavery. He never spoke bitterness in any way, as far as the text says. So we can pretty much assume that his moral compass remained pointed towards God. Despite all the bad examples of the authority figures in his life. And they were bad examples with poor decisions, and the jealousy of his brothers that was so venomous that if you weren't here last week, they sold him into slavery, and he was taken to Egypt. His brothers did that. Joseph's awful experience to the outside observer, to someone just looking at Joseph's life, it's not hard to say, you know what, he had this coming. I mean, he kind of brought this on himself. It's easy way to I mean, you could say that. I mean, he's his father's favorite. He didn't try to hide it. His father gave him a coat that had all kinds of colors in it. Nobody else had that. He wore it all the time. He didn't care. He snitched on his brothers. He went back and said, they're not working. They're supposed to be working in the fields. He wasn't out there working, but he snitched on. Then he had the gall to tell his brothers, I had a dream that you guys all bowed down and worshiped me. And they're like, what's the matter with you, man? So you could say he had it coming, but he was what I call blissfully ignorant. I don't think he was intentionally trying to smear anything in anyone's face. He just didn't have a malicious heart. He just kind of floated along, and they're like, get a load of this guy. Who does he think he is? So it's not too hard to understand why some people might say he kind of put himself in this situation. And to make matters worse, he had another dream where his parents bowed down to him along with his brothers, and he told his parents that. And they said, you better check yourself. That's not reality. They just kind of let that go. So with all this in mind, I can understand how somebody say, well, he brought it on himself. But the rest of the story is what puts Joseph's trust in God on trial in the forefront of this discussion, because this is where we see some of the most complicated paths in life to navigate for him. How strong is his faith? How tightly is he going to adhere to his resolve of obedience to God? This tells us much more about this 17-year-old boy than anything else. And the 17-year-old boy who may have had it coming. So in our first discussion, we opened the Bible. We saw a lot about what happened to Joseph, what the status in his family was, the surrounding circumstances, what led him into getting thrown in a pit. And then they were going to kill him, and then his brothers didn't kill him, and they sold him, and he's there he goes. Now he's off to Egypt. Dad thinks he's dead. So that's the title of today's message, The Dreamer Enslaved. And we left off where they sold him to the merchants last week. His brothers took his coat, and they dipped it in blood, and they took it to their dad and said, look, he was attacked by a wild animal. That's how they tried to pull that off. And their dad was upset. Jacob was inconsolable, weeping, wailing. His favorite son from his favorite wife is now what he thought devoured. So Joseph's path to Egypt had to be a tough one. I can't imagine after going through all that. Well, remember when he was thrown in the pit by his brothers, he could hear them talking about killing him. He's like, they're talking about killing me. I mean, he could hear everything, and they were ignoring him. He's probably like, what's going to happen to me, man? I'm just a kid. I'm 17. Am I going to just be out in fields building bricks? I mean, what are they going to do to me? What's going to happen to my brother? If they hate me, Benjamin's the youngest. Benjamin and Joseph had the same mom. And Benjamin's little. He's like, if they did this to me, what are they going to do to him? I want to go home. Am I ever going to see my dad, my family again? Am I going to see what's going to happen? I mean, this would all be going through his head. That's a lot to face. Just sold into slavery. Dad's favorite, now you're sold into slavery and you're headed to Egypt. This would have been a psychological torture that no one should have to face. So once Joseph arrives in Egypt, we see that this is interesting, he is appointed the head of his master's house, Potiphar, high-ranking captain of the guard, which means lead executioner for Pharaoh. I don't know how you get on a wagon and end up as a slave. They have to vet you. They talk to everyone there. They look at you. They talk with you to see where your head is to decide where they're going to put the slaves. You're going to go out in the fields. You're going to serve in the palace. Whatever governs their decision process, they would have had to put Joseph through the whole thing to check out his baggage, and there was certainly plenty of it. They had to have an understanding of who this kid was. What does he have to overcome? He's got to trust in God, but it's important that we look closely at what surely must have been going through his mind. So there was obviously something, Denisha, you can come up now. There was something about Joseph. That's the whole topic of this whole message. There is something about Joseph that gave cause for him to be chosen for such a high position immediately upon arriving in Egypt, put in the house of Potiphar. So, with some healthy speculation, I decided that Joseph would have to talk to the HR counselor And the HR counselor would have to decide what to do with Joseph after figuring out who he is and what his background is. So we think the conversation might have went like this. I'll be Joseph, so I'm 17. And you're the HR counselor. You decide where I'm going. Ready?
So, tell me about your family.
Well, let's see. There's my great-grandfather.
Yeah? What was he like?
Well, he was, God told him that he would have a son.
Well, that is certainly a good thing.
Yeah. But then him and my great-grandmother decided it wasn't really happening fast enough. So they decided they'd get some other lady pregnant. And, also, he took his son, my grandpa, the one that eventually was born just like God said, to sacrifice him with a knife. But God stopped it because he was just testing him.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And then there's my grandpa Isaac. His name means laughter.
Oh, really? Was he a funny guy?
Not so much. No, not so much. He and my grandma, they had twins. One of them was Jacob, my dad, and the other one was my uncle Esau. But they didn't get along. They didn't get along at all. They actually started fighting with each other in the womb.
In the womb?
Yeah. It's complicated. It's, again, Dad's brother, my uncle, actually played a big part in starting a whole other religion. It's that hates Jews, which is weird because, Jew, and wants to kill us. And because Dad tricked my uncle out of his birthright with a bowl of stew. He did it with a bowl of stew. And so they're not on good terms at all, not by a long shot.
Wait, I'm confused.
Yeah, I see that. Listen, you're not alone. I get this all the time.
Okay, well, tell me about your parents.
Which ones?
What do you mean, which ones? Your mom and dad?
Well, I got one dad and 4 moms. Well, actually, I got 1 mom and 3 stepmoms. My aunt is also one of my moms.
Do you have any siblings?
Sore subject.
How so? What, not get along with them?
That's putting it mildly.
None of them?
Well, I mean, I love my little brother, Benjamin, more than anything in the world. He's the youngest. We both have the same mom.
Yes, it's true in most families. The oldest and youngest siblings are often the easiest to get along with.
Yeah, my oldest brother actually saved my life.
Wow, that's great to hear. Do you want to tell me what happened?
Yeah, him and the rest of my brothers were talking about how to kill me. And they decided not to kill me, but just to sell me as a slave instead, so I wouldn't be killed. Hence, save my life by, not killing me.
Heart of gold.
Well, I kind of think he did it because, well, the truth is, my dad was already mad at him for sleeping with one of his wives. So he figured he could earn some brownie points from the old man.
Your oldest brother slept with one of your father's wives?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to look at it, I suppose. On the other hand, you could also say he slept with his own aunt. Or is it, would it be step-aunt? I don't know. In any case, it was a really, really bad idea all the way around.
What is wrong with you people?
Excuse me?
Oh, nothing.
Okay, listen. That's how I wound up here. Okay, in the HR evaluation office. So where will you be assigning me to work?
Okay, hang on. We'll get to that in a minute. You have a lot of what we counselors call baggage. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. So let's just do a quick recap. You come from a family plagued with controversies such as directly disobeying God, deceiving one another, a history of violence dating back to the womb, seething envy, gross missexual conduct, and, constant betrayal on every possible level within a family.
Yep, that pretty much sums it up.
How is it, if I may ask, that you seem so composed, so put together, and honestly unaffected by all of this?
That's $1 million question, isn't it? Believe it or not, I get asked that.
Oh, I believe it. I absolutely, completely, 100% believe it.
All right, listen, the truth is, I never wanted to fall apart like so many others do, especially those closest to me. I realized long ago the only way to keep it together in life is to trust God and what His Word says. I grew up in the shadows of confusion and chaos, and the only way to keep shadows from guiding you is to extinguish them with light. The light of God's truth. I keep my eyes constantly set on what God says. I filter every thought through His Word, and I abandon every thought that disagrees with God's instruction. I'm not unaffected by the sins of others, but I am unafflicted by their evil intentions. I believe my sole purpose in this life is to demonstrate that God can and must be trusted.
Wow. You know, Joseph, you seem wise beyond your years. I hope to learn more about your God. And I'm thinking that we have a position for you that requires someone of high integrity. I'll be recommending you. I just have one request. Can you please make sure that your family never comes around here?
I'll do my best.
I mean it, like never. Like, no.
I'll try.
Yeah. No, they can't ever come here. Never.
Right. I said I'll try.
Yeah. But I just want to be clear, like never. Ever. Like not at all.
Scene. Okay. So, yeah, we did that a long time ago too, but that's probably how it went. Joseph was focused on God. Thanks, Tanisha. And because of that, that's how you end up in Potiphar's house. You don't just come in on a wagon with a bunch of slave, callous hands and feet and make it there without being screened. They don't want to put somebody in a house of somebody they could potentially hate. So he rose up. We're going to read from Genesis 3. This is why there's only one verse today, because it's a long one. So we're going to be reading, this is broken in two sections for the rest of the message. So I'm going to be reading 1 through 5 right now. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had to be taken down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So we're certainly shifting gears here from where Joseph was before. And if you're taking notes, mark down in chapter 39, 1 through 5 are all about Joseph's blessings and about his prosperity. Remember what dire straits he was in. And now, in that last verse, all these lines are in there. The Lord was with Joseph. He was a successful man. His master saw that the Lord was with him. The Lord made all he did prosper. Joseph found favor. He was made overseer, put under authority. Under his authority. So, these are all blessings Joseph's getting now, strictly because of adhering to his faith and walking in obedience. It certainly appears that he didn't have to worry about making bricks or being thrown out to the fields of the mud anymore. His first job was in a palatial residence as an executive officer. They separate these people, and then Potiphar has the last pick. He'll come in. Who are the brain heads here? The ones I want to buy. And there's a lot to take into consideration. Joseph's position as the head of the house at Potiphar's would have meant that he comes in contact with some of the most prominent people in Egypt. It would have been like working in the White House. He would have come in contact with several people, and it only stands to reason that if Potiphar thought so highly of Joseph, that he would have talked him up to other people. Joseph's reputation as a trusted and well-skilled servant would have spread quickly. Potiphar he would have been like, man, this Hebrew kid's working hard. He's on top of things. I don't have to worry about nothing. He takes care of everything I need taken care of. I have more free time. I can do more. My household never ran smoother than it does now. All my servants work hard. There's nothing I have to oversee. He's taking care of everything. Every need I have, he meets it, and my home is run. Everyone that meets him loves him. But that's the problem. Everyone that meets him loves him. You wouldn't think that could be a problem, but it is a problem. Because back there, when we open the next verse, we see that it's going to say, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Or did I read that in the last one? I don't know if it's the last one or the next one. But it's in Genesis 39. He was handsome in form and appearance. The original Hebrew says he was really, really good looking. He was really, I guess, I don't know, ladies might equate him to Brad Pitt or something. I don't know. But in the original text, his mom knew he was good looking too. Because when she told him, we use words like, don't sleep around or don't be promiscuous. But in some of the writings, I'm not sure if they're in Genesis text or in Josephus, but the way it's documented of what Joseph said to his mother was actually it was classier. It was also more specific, that you understand what that means. She knew girls were going to come around him, and she said, Joseph, do not give them your strength. Do not give them your strength. And she knew what he was in for, because he was a good-looking kid. Well, that became kind of a problem. 39:6-20 says, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master doesn't concern himself with anything in this house. Everything he owns is entrusted to my care. No one's greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused her advances or even to be around her. And one day he went up to the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were there. She had this set up. She caught him by his cloak and said, come here, come with me. He left his cloak in her hand and he ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her servants and said, look, this Hebrew's that's been brought here was trying to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream, he left. He ran out of here. He left his coat here, right here in my hand. And then she told the story. She told it to her husband. This Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left. And I still have his cloak. So when the master heard of the story that the wife told him, she told him again, this is how he has treated me. And he was furious. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Isn't that awful? She's bitter because he won't respond to her advances because he's an upright guy. So she wants to pay him back. So she lies, bears false witness, has him thrown in the clink. These are usually down in holes under the ground, these jails. So in a recap, in our first week of discussion, we learned about the dynamics involving staying true to God in all circumstances, where jealousy abounds. And this week we looked at the second leg of his journey, beginning at a point where, right after he was sold into slavery, the key phrase here today is the Lord was with Joseph. Now we know the Lord doesn't abandon Joseph just because he got framed and thrown in jail, right? He's seen worse than this. They were going to kill him. They threw him in a well and sold him into slavery. He's probably like, here we go again, man. Here we go again. What a great way to begin life's most challenging journeys. But the Bible says, draw near to God, he'll draw near to you. And Joseph drew near to God, and God, the Lord, was with him. And he's with us. When you're going through something like that, there are times I know, it could be a letter. It could be a letter from a doctor. It could be a phone call from the IRS or the mortgage company. It could be a relative that got bad news, and God is there. And Joseph trusts God. None of us are facing being thrown in a pit or being put in prison and possibly executed if they decide to do it. But the Lord was with Joseph because of trust, faith, and obedience. And Joseph was fine through all of it because it rolled off his back. Those are the first things he thought about. That's the application of today. The dreamer enslaved. Joseph's enslaved by the world, but he's set free because of his faith in God. Today's discussion birthed a lot of life applications, all revealed by asking the same question. Man, how did he do that? How did he gut his way through those circumstances? How did he just not completely fall apart and give up all hope? What kept him sane and sound? You know, you're right when life seems sweet. Cool, man, I hit my sweet spot. Now somebody's going to lie on me? How do you get through that? Well, the biggest clue is evident in Joseph's response to this. Listen to me. You tell people what they're thinking is in their heart. It comes out of their mouth. How did he do it? Well, what did he say to Potiphar's wife? How then could I do such a wicked thing against God? That's what he said. His priority system started with God's value system. Notice he didn't say Potiphar. He didn't say, how can I do something like this to Potiphar? I mean, the preamble started with what a nice guy Potiphar is, but at the end, the climax, the point to drive home wasn't, how could I do this to Potiphar? That isn't what he said. He said, how could I do such a wicked thing against God? Because he recognized all sins are against God. No matter what person you commit a sin against, it's against God. And Joseph knew that. And this gives us tremendous insight to the inner workings of his heart, going clear back to the beginning when he suffered at the hands of his own brothers. And we now see through his own words that Joseph looks at the whole world through God's eyes. He has so much trust, so much faith. And God never spoke to him directly like he did his forefathers. But Joseph said, I will not do this wicked thing against God. And if we apply that same school of thought back to in our own lives, to looking back to even back to when he was thrown in the pit, you know, and he could hear him. The type of guy Joseph was, I don't know that Joseph was just in there feeling bad for himself. He was probably heartbroken at the sin that his brothers was committing. He was probably thinking, how could they do this wicked thing against God? To hurt my dad, hurt me, hurt our family. I mean, he probably hurt for them, knowing what's coming. Even under the most tempting situation a young man could be in with a woman in a palace, and any man who wasn't with God probably thought, you know what, I can get away with this. She hits on me all the time. Friends with benefits, whatever the world looks at it, so turns a blind eye to God, and a lot of young men would have seen it that way, but not Joseph. He knows the audience of one is more important than anything else. I'll not do this sin against God. He aligned his priorities with God's value system. And no matter what we face in the world, when our priorities are governed by God's values, that's how we end up too. You'll always win. You'll always win. That's the thing about Joseph. He always won. Life got hard, he still went. People go to Joseph. When Joseph shows up, you know everything's going to be all right. You'll always win. As we dig deeper into this study, you see that the people around you win too. God blessed Potiphar's house and everything that was going on inside because Joseph was there. Because Joseph was there. You, by being a good Christian person, being the one, you may be with someone who's not. They may be blessed because you are. When the Bible says love covers a multitude of sins, it's not talking about your sins. If you love people, your sins will be covered. It means your love to others, your presence with others, their sins can be covered by God because of your presence. It's a complicated explanation, but that's the short version of it. And we see it in Genesis. Potiphar's household was blessed for the sake of Joseph. That's how he did it. All right.